Michael rubbed his temples tiredly, staring at the monitor. His restaurant was only a month old, and the security staff had not been assembled yet. Of course, he knew that among the employees there could always be those who, to put it mildly, didn't mind making a profit at someone else's expense. Everyone had his own motives. Some were short of money, some were just used to pulling what was lying around. But one thing he knew for sure: if you do not put a stop to it, you can lose much more than a few plates or bottles from the bar. Having collected money to open a restaurant, Michael spent several years and all his savings. And now, when the establishment began to bring in more profit than he expected, his suspicions began to be confirmed. Jane, the dishwasher, carries a bulky bag every time she leaves after her shift. He'd set up the cameras only 3 days ago, but it was already clear that this wasn't the first time he'd seen it. Well, it was time to take the bull by the horns. Michael stood up resolutely from the table. He couldn't believe that such a young girl, who looked not even 20 years old, could be so cunning and clever. But the facts were clear. Security had to be strengthened, and it was better to start with someone. He noticed that Jane always went out through the emergency exit, which was closed by the receptionist. He wondered if she was aware of what was going on. In any case, as long as no one noticed anything, the girl continued her escapades. Michael decided he would catch her tonight. When the restaurant closed, Michael quickly headed home, as his house was only 3 blocks away. Parking near the back exit of the restaurant, he turned off his headlights and waited. It didn't take long for the girl to arrive. Jane carefully adjusted her cap and pulled out the very bag Michael had seen on the cameras. "Here we go," she whispered to herself. "My girl, be patient a little longer. Mommy will be back soon, and you can rest." Michael tensed, but not at her words, but at what happened next. Jane hadn't stolen a bottle of expensive wine or food. She checked the contents of the bag with such care and caution that it caught Michael's attention. The girl pulled a blanket out of the bag and stroked it lightly. Something quietly stirred inside. "Shit," Michael cursed to himself as he got out of the car. "What is she hiding in there?" As he approached Jane, she sensed his approach and twitched nervously. "Oh," she blurted out as Michael suddenly appeared behind her. "What's in your bag?" he asked in a serious tone. "Do you think no one will notice you're stealing?" Jane covered the bag with her own, abruptly cutting off his accusation. "I wasn't stealing anything. Shame on you for thinking that about me. I'm not the one who's ashamed. You should be if you do such things." "Show me the bag or I'll call the police," Michael said insistently. Jane's nerves gave way. At that moment a faint cry came from the bag. She crouched down, carefully opened the bag and carefully took out the baby in her arms. "A baby?" Michael gasped. "Is that yours? Are you working with a baby?" Jane nodded slowly, her hands trembling and her eyes filling with tears. Her secret was out. Michael stood in shock, not knowing what to say. He had never imagined that the problem could be so personal and complex. "Am I fired?" she asked barely audibly, holding the baby in her arms. Michael was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, "Wait, don't jump to conclusions. Let me give you a ride home." "Where do you live?" "Not far, around the corner," Jane answered, still in shock. "Well, let's go. And give me the damn bag." Michael couldn't take his eyes off the scene. He knew Jane didn't drag her child to work for a good life. He had been through a lot of hardship himself, and his heart was not made of stone. Arriving at her house, Michael went up to the floor with her. As they stood in front of the door, Jane looked at him questioningly. "I could use a cup of tea," Michael said cheerfully, putting on his usual carefree smile. Jane shrugged slightly and invited Michael in. She hadn't expected this turn of events, but how could she refuse? He'd seen everything, and he'd cared. Finally, she put the kettle on, and Michael made himself comfortable on a chair in her kitchen, as if he were at home. "Do you really carry that baby around with you every day?" Michael couldn't believe his eyes. "What am I supposed to do?" Jane sighed softly, setting the mug down in front of him. "I just don't have any other choice. I'm alone, there's no one to help me. The money for formula is going faster than I can make it. The baby's quiet, sleeping in the back. I thought it was better than leaving her at home alone or with some strangers. Michael stared at her, not knowing what to say. Something inside him snapped, as if it were his own pain. He remembered what it felt like when it felt like the whole world was against you. "Where's the baby's father?" he asked, though, frankly, he'd already guessed her answer. Jane looked at him with a sad smile. "He disappeared as soon as he found out I was pregnant. And he took everything worth anything in my apartment. I didn't even go to the police because I was ashamed. I didn't want to see anyone." Michael set his cup aside and stared out the window. Her story touched a nerve. He, too, had been through his own hell. Raised in a family of alcoholics, and if he hadn't been removed from his family by social services, he might have gone down the same path as his parents. Jane went on to tell how she had been threatened by some shady types demanding that she sell the apartment. As soon as she refused, she was intimidated, and against this backdrop, her milk dropped dramatically. It seemed that she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and there was nowhere to wait for help. When she heard about the opening of the restaurant, she grabbed this chance as a lifeline. The job was her only way out of this endless darkness. Michael listened to her, but with each word he became more and more convinced she was stronger than she thought she was. Her resilience deserved respect, not contempt. But now that he knew the truth, he couldn't just walk away and pretend it hadn't happened. "You know, you don't have to stay here," Michael said, getting up and walking to the window. "Those people might come back. Who knows what else they might be up to? Come on, let's go to my place. It's safer at my place." Jane's eyes went wide. "What?" She couldn't believe her ears. "I can't just leave." "Yes, you can," Michael turned to her abruptly. "You think I'm going to let you live here alone when you're being threatened? You have a child in your arms. Trust me, everything will be fine." He said it so forcefully that Jane involuntarily obeyed. She began to pack quickly, putting the baby's belongings in her bag. Inside her, everything was clenching with fear. But deep down she knew she couldn't do it alone. When they went outside, Jane's neighbor, who used to look after the baby sometimes, appeared on the doorstep. "I see Daddy's here, huh? So I don't have to babysit your baby anymore? And you're not coming to clean for me anymore?" The old woman looked disgruntled, as if she'd been deprived of an important source of income. Michael grinned and showed her his white teeth. "That's right, now you'll have to clean up after yourself." His tone was so calm that the neighbors slammed the door shut fearfully. Jane froze for a moment, then stifled a laugh, snuggling into Michael's shoulder. It was the first time in months that she felt truly at ease. And though she wasn't sure it would last, she was savoring the moment now. When they reached Michael's apartment, Jane was surprised at how cozy it was. But what struck her most was how thoughtful Michael was about her baby. The kitchen was already stocked with ready-made baby things, a crib, a stroller, and bags of baby supplies. "How? When?" Jane looked at all this with amazement. "I can't accept it, it's too much." "You don't have to return anything," Michael smiled. "I just want to help. And by the way, you don't have to leave." Jane couldn't believe her ears. She suddenly realized that for the first time in a long time, someone really cared about her and her daughter. And it was strange, but nice. Michael left the room, leaving Jane alone with her thoughts. She sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. So much had happened in one evening that her head was spinning. All the chaos, the threats, working with a baby in her arms, the lack of support. And suddenly it all ends? Just like that? She walked around the apartment, feeling a strange sense of calm. The room Michael had given her was cozy and warm, and there was a pleasant smell of freshly baked scones in the air. She found groceries in the refrigerator and a high chair in the corner of the kitchen. Everything about the place screamed, "You're welcome here." Meanwhile, Michael returned with 2 cups of coffee. He looked relaxed, though there was still a certain tension in his eyes. Well, make yourself comfortable, he said, placing the cup in front of Jane. You can stay here as long as you need to. Thank you, but I can't sit on your neck that long, Jane replied quietly, nervously rubbing her mug. It's not right. It wouldn't be right to leave you in the hole where you're being threatened, Michael said softly but firmly. You're not alone now. You have a child, and you're responsible for her. And I'm just helping you not to get lost in this hell. Michael's words sounded so convincing that Jane couldn't find anything to say. Her eyes moistened again with tears. She had felt lonely for so long, but now, in the silence of the cozy apartment, it seemed that her life might be better yet. Listen, let's do this. You rest for a couple of days, and then we'll figure something out together, Michael said, watching her wipe away her tears. I'll call someone to fill in, and you'll need to regain your strength. Jane nodded silently, and then slowly raised her eyes to his. Why are you doing this? Her voice was almost a whisper. You hardly know me. Michael thought for a moment, trying to find the right words. Because, he began, stroking his cup, I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. I grew up in a family that cared less than grains of sand in the desert. And if there had been someone around to help me then, things might have been different. I can't change my past, but I can help you change your future. Jane stared at him, trying to realize the depth of those words. Everything she had been feeling, fear, pain, despair, suddenly shifted to the background. For the first time in a long time, she felt that she was not alone. This strange feeling of warmth and hope swept over her head. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Michael added, getting up from the table. Your job now is to give your baby the best for her. And I'm going to help you do that. Alone with her thoughts, Jane tried to sort out her feelings. Everything was too good to be true. But she knew one thing for sure, for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. In the morning, Michael casually dropped the question. You know, you and I should get married. Jane almost dropped her breakfast plate. She froze, staring at him with her eyes wide open. What? Her voice shook with shock. Well, yes. I think it would be the right thing to do. Angelina needs her father, and you could use some support, he continued nonchalantly, as if he were discussing the weather. Jane couldn't believe her ears. It sounded like a joke. She looked at him, trying to find a hint of humor in his face, but Michael was dead serious. Are you really suggesting this? She asked quietly, not believing her ears. Yes, Michael answered calmly, rising from the table. You're a strong woman, Jane. But sometimes you have to let others be strong for you. He left her alone in the kitchen, and Jane sat staring at one point, trying to make sense of what was happening. All her earlier fears suddenly began to melt away, giving way to some new, strange feeling. It was something akin to hope. Jane sat in silence, contemplating what had just happened. Michael's suggestion was still ringing in her ears. How was that even possible? She worked for him as a dishwasher, hiding a baby in the back room, and now he was proposing that she marry him? The situation was so unbelievable that her head was spinning with thoughts. Michael retreated to another room, leaving her alone with her worries. She stood up, trying to get her thoughts in order, and walked over to the crib where little Angelina slept. Jane ran her fingers through her soft hair and thought about how lucky she was to have this child. The little girl was her only bright spot in this darkness of life. But what to do next? What to do about this unexpected offer? Meanwhile, Michael returned, holding a couple of shopping bags. I was thinking that you and Angelina need some fresh air. How about a walk in the park? He suggested, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Jane grinned nervously. A walk? After everything that's happened in the last few days, you're suggesting we just go out for a walk? Well, why not? Michael shrugged. Sometimes the simplest things can help put your thoughts in order. Besides, I don't think Angelina would mind stretching out in the fresh air. Jane gave him a puzzled look, but decided to agree. Everything that was going on around her was so unexpected and unpredictable that maybe a walk would bring some sanity back into her life. They left the house and headed toward the park. Along the way, Michael unobtrusively asked questions, trying to learn more about Jane and her life. She told him about her childhood, about growing up with her grandmother, who often left Jane to do the housework on her own. Michael listened attentively, not interrupting, but Jane sensed his genuine interest. "What do you think about all this?" he asked suddenly, when they reached a small bench in the shade of the trees. Jane froze for a moment before answering. "I think you're crazy." Michael laughed. "Well, maybe I am. But I don't like to leave people in trouble. And you, Jane, despite the odds, are doing remarkably well. Your resilience and strength is something to be respected. That's why I suggested, he rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment, trying to find the words. "Michael," Jane looked at him seriously, "I'm grateful for everything you've done. But it's all happening too fast, you know? I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone think about marriage." "I'm not asking you to make a decision now," he said calmly. "Just think about it. There's plenty of time for you and me. In the meantime, I just want to be there to help you." Jane sighed, not knowing how to react. It all seemed unbelievable to her. But something inside her told her that this might be the chance she'd been waiting for all her life. Michael was unlike any man she'd known before. He was reliable, calm, and most importantly, willing to take responsibility. When they got home, there was a pleasant surprise waiting for them in the kitchen. Michael had gone to the store and bought groceries, and freshly baked scones and fruit juice were already on the table. It was so unexpectedly sweet that Jane smiled. "Are we going to have dinner?" Michael asked cheerfully, watching her reaction. "It's too much," Jane mumbled, but took the bun. "Thank you." "You're welcome." "Consider it the first step toward our new life," Michael grinned, taking a sip of juice. Jane couldn't stop thinking about his words. A new life? With him? It was too wonderful to be true. But right now, sitting in the kitchen, she felt happy. For the first time in a long time, she had hope. Jane had looked at Michael with disbelief, but his concern and sincerity had knocked her out of her usual streak of disbelief. Everything was happening so fast that her life seemed to turn upside down in an instant. Before, she would not have believed that she could be in such a situation, in a warm house, with a trustworthy man by her side, who cared for her and her child. But there was a but. It was all too good to be true. In the evening, when Angelina was already fast asleep in her new crib, Jane settled down on the couch. Michael sat across from her, with a cup of coffee in his hand, looking out the window. There was a cozy silence in the room, broken only by the baby's quiet breathing. "Michael," Jane began, breaking the silence, "I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but all this, it's too much. Why are you doing this?" Michael thought for a moment, as if searching for the right words to explain his motives. "Because I care," he finally answered. "You're a strong woman, Jane. But you don't have to take it all on yourself. Sometimes you just need someone to be there to back you up." Jane pondered his words. On the one hand, it seemed logical. But on the other hand, she'd been burned so many times that trusting someone was a real challenge. "I know it's hard for you to trust," Michael read her mind. "But I don't have any ulterior motives. I just want to help. You and your daughter deserve a normal life." "But you hardly know me," Jane tried to find some rational argument in her head. "What if I'm not who I seem to be?" Michael smiled. "Well, first of all, you've already told me a lot. And secondly, I trust my feelings. Yes, we haven't known each other for years, but it doesn't take me long to realize that you're good." Jane laughed, unable to help herself. She hadn't heard good things about herself in a long time, and it was a little strange. But maybe Michael was right. Maybe she does deserve better. "All right," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "we'll see." The next day Michael left on business, leaving Jane and Angelina in his apartment. She took the opportunity to tidy up the house, even though Michael didn't seem to mind the mess. She scrubbed the floors, dusted, and even cooked dinner. When Michael returned, he was clearly surprised. His apartment hadn't looked this clean since he bought it. "Wow," he grinned as he entered the kitchen, where Jane was setting the table. "I don't think I've come home, but to some five-star hotel?" "Don't exaggerate," Jane said with a laugh. "I just thought I'd settle in a little, since you'd taken us in." Michael threw his jacket on a chair and sat down at the table, looking around with a satisfied smile. "That's a little too nice, Jane. You're a guest, and you're already organizing the place. I think it's looking like you're going to be here for a while." "Well, if you don't mind," she paused, looking at him carefully. "Do you mind?" Michael laughed. "I'm all for it. You know, my life was pretty boring before you guys came along. Now it seems that every day brings something new." Jane couldn't hide her smile. For the first time in a long time she felt truly at ease. No tension, no fear of tomorrow. After dinner, they sat on the couch. Michael turned on some old movie, and as the story unfolded on the screen, Jane relaxed more and more. She didn't even notice as she gradually began to fall asleep, her head leaning on Michael's shoulder. He, sensing her trust, smiled quietly and adjusted her pillow to make her more comfortable. It pleased him to see her so calm and serene. And in that moment he realized that he would do everything he could to make sure she had that feeling forever. The next morning Jane awoke to a slight noise in the kitchen. She opened her eyes, and for a moment she didn't realize where she was. It was a cozy apartment, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and Michael was in the kitchen, apparently already bustling about. She lifted herself off the couch and stretched, savoring the rare feeling of calm and security. Last night had seemed like a dream. The fact that she was really here, in someone else's apartment, with a man she hardly knew, and he was taking care of her and her baby, it was like some kind of movie. She got up and, throwing a thin robe over her shoulders, went to the kitchen. Michael was at the stove, making scrambled eggs, and the table was already covered with toast, butter, and freshly squeezed orange juice. "Good morning," Jane said quietly, leaning against the corner of the door, as if embarrassed by the situation. "Good morning," Michael said cheerfully, turning to her with a smile. "How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you," Jane smiled back, sitting down at the table. "I guess I haven't rested like this in a long time." Michael put a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her and sat down across from her. "Well, you get used to it. It'll always be like this from now on." Jane grinned softly, thinking that she wasn't used to such words. Michael always spoke straightforwardly, without curtsy, and that was his special charm. His confidence and calmness really inspired trust. They ate breakfast in silence, and from time to time Michael glanced at her as if checking to see if everything was all right. Jane suddenly thought about how much her life had changed in the last few days. Not so long ago she had been wondering where to find money for formula, and now she was sitting at the table with this strange but incredibly kind man who seemed ready to take her worries on his shoulders. After breakfast, Michael stood up, stretching, and asked with a cheerful smile, "What are your plans for today?" Jane shrugged. "To be honest, I'm not used to having plans," she replied. "Usually all my days are the same: work, take care of the baby, and then work again." "Well, if that's the case, I suggest we break out of that cycle. Let's go for a walk. Angelina would definitely benefit from some fresh air, and you could use some fun." Jane hesitated. The suggestion seemed innocent enough, but everything inside her resisted the idea. Too much had happened, and she felt that it was all too precarious, too shaky. "Michael, do you really think it's a good idea?" she asked uncertainly. "I'm just here as a temporary guest. And then, I don't want people to get the wrong idea." Michael walked over to her, put his hand on her shoulder, and said softly, "Jane, whatever other people think doesn't matter. You're here because you needed help. I'm here because I want to help. Everything else is just noise." Those words of his, though they sounded simple, really stuck with her for some reason. She looked at Michael with gratitude and realized that it was time for her to let go of her fears and start living. Not the way she had before, when everything was on the edge of survival, but so that she and her daughter could finally breathe freely. They decided to go to the park. Angelina was curiously looking at the world around her from the new stroller Michael had bought her. Jane enjoyed a rare moment of peace, strolling through the alleys and listening to the carefree conversations of passers-by. Michael didn't pry too much into her soul, he was just there for her, and that was more than enough. After the walk they returned home, and Jane happily took over dinner. She hadn't felt this eager to cook in a long time, but everything seemed different at Michael's house. She decided to make something special, pasta with seafood and vegetables, the dish she always made when she wanted to indulge in something delicious. Michael, returning from a walk with his dog, was clearly impressed by how good the kitchen smelled. "Wow, you really can cook!" he exclaimed, peering into the pots. "Well, I haven't been a dishwasher all my life," Jane grinned. "There are some things I'm really good at." "I'm beginning to see that," Michael said with a smile. They ate dinner, talking about nothing, joking and laughing. At that moment, Jane realized that Michael had somehow made her life easier. Every day used to be a struggle, but now she could just enjoy the little joys. As the evening drew to a close, Michael discreetly suggested, "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe you should think about staying here permanently. I'm not talking about getting married, although that's a great idea, but about not going back to that life of humiliation and intimidation." Jane stopped, feeling her heart skip a beat. This was the moment of truth. She didn't know what to say. Stay here? Was it that simple? Michael noticed her confusion and added softly, "I don't expect anything. I just want you to know that you don't have to go back into that chaos. You can choose what's best for you and for Angelina." Jane stood silently, pondering Michael's words. The whole world she'd known had crumbled so quickly, and the new one Michael was offering seemed so simple and secure. But it was one thing to dream of a better life, and quite another to take that step. She had doubts. What if it was all just an illusion? What if this comfort disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared? "I don't know," she murmured quietly, her eyes downcast. "It's all too much for me. You realize that Angelina and I can't be your responsibility, don't you? I don't want to be a burden." Michael stepped closer and gently took her hand. "You're not my responsibility, Jane. You're a choice. And I want you and your daughter here with us. I've been through a lot in my life, and if there's an opportunity to make someone's life just a little bit better, I'm going to take that chance." Jane sighed, looking into his eyes. She didn't know how to react to this. Everything that was happening was so unexpected, but deep down she knew that Michael wasn't the kind of man to throw words around. He wasn't trying to bribe or entice her, he was simply offering her what she'd been missing for so long, stability and care. "Michael," she said, finally breaking the silence. "I'm grateful for everything. For what you've done for me and for Angelina. But I'm afraid it's all too good to be true. What if things change? What if something goes wrong?" Michael smiled. "Life is unpredictable. But you know, I learned one simple truth a long time ago: if you sit around afraid of what might go wrong, nothing good will ever happen. You either accept the risk and move forward, or you stay where you are. And right now, you have a choice. You can choose what's best for you and your daughter." Jane was silent, pondering his words. He spoke with such confidence that she even felt a certain inner response. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid. Time to step forward and believe that the world might not be as cruel as she'd known it before. She took Michael's hand and looked him straight in the eye and said, "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I think I'm willing to take the risk." Michael smiled. Now that's the right attitude. They sat in the kitchen for another long time, discussing the details of how they would live their lives. Jane still wasn't sure exactly how they would make their lives work, but one thing was certain: she felt safe around Michael. She was no longer alone in the world. Several weeks passed. Jane was slowly adjusting to her new life. She and Michael found a balance in their life together, He was patient and did not interfere with her with unsolicited advice, and she tried to help around the house and take care of Angelina. The little girl seemed to feel the change. She became calmer, slept better, and her smile now greeted each new day. Michael, for his part, was there for her, but he didn't pressure Jane. He didn't demand that she make an immediate decision to marry or move, he simply supported her, letting her know that she could rely on him. One evening, as they reconvened for dinner, Jane suddenly decided to broach the subject she had been avoiding all these weeks. "Michael," she began, a little nervously. "Do you really think we should get married?" He took his eyes off his plate and looked at her, as if trying to understand where the question had come from. "I won't push you, Jane," he said softly. "But yes, I think it would be the right thing to do. Angelina's growing up, she needs a father. And you need support. But I won't force you. You have to decide for yourself." Jane was silent for a moment, pondering his words. Everything he said was true. Michael was there for her and ready to take on this responsibility. But she was still afraid. "I'm just afraid that this whole thing might fall apart," she admitted honestly. "I've been wrong about people so many times before. I don't want to be left with a broken heart again." Michael leaned toward her, his gaze serious. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he said. "But one thing I do know is that I'm not leading you. We'll get through this together, no matter how hard it is." These words suddenly touched Jane to the core. She sensed that Michael was being sincere, and her fears slowly began to dissipate. "Okay," she finally answered, a slight smile on her lips. "I think I'm ready to take that step." Michael smiled broadly, and in that moment Jane realized that she had finally made the right choice. End of story. Sorry for possible mistakes. The text is voiced by Neural Network, and our team is just learning. If you like the story, support with a like, subscribe to the channel and press the bell not to miss new interesting videos.